This week in racing, the Indy 500 entry list continues to grow. We've got a couple of entries on the competition side to talk about, but we've also got a pretty significant Indy 500 entry to talk about that's on the TV side, specifically for NBC Sports' first Indianapolis 500 broadcast. And needless to say, it's a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of the reaction. We're also going to be talking about a bit of a story which is a non-story. Something that confused a few sports car fans over the week, and something I'd like to talk about. Is IMSA DPi going SPEC? I don't think so, and let me explain why. But first, let's get into talking some Indy 500. So, Jake Query reported on Twitter that Harding Steinbrenner Racing will be entering a second car at this year's Indianapolis 500. Now, this was one of the entries that some folks thought was a little more unlikely. However, after the Pato Award controversy, it looks like they are indeed set for a second car at least for Indianapolis. Now, the speculation on the driver is kind of up in the air. The conventional wisdom seems to point towards Carlos Munoz, who obviously has some serious Andretti connections, as well as being pretty damn fast when it comes to the Indianapolis 500. But you never know. There could be some surprises in terms of this seat. Certainly this team likes to surprise people with their choices sometimes. And we also have, not necessarily confirmation yet, we have the first acknowledgement that Salesforce will be working once again with JR Hildebrand. They were the primary sponsor for him at Dreyer Reinbold Racing last year, and it looks like they will be partnering with him again, most likely in the Indianapolis 500 for JR Hildebrand with Dreyer Reinbold Racing. That would be another Chevrolet team, so we've got a Chevrolet team and a Honda team confirmed. And at this point, we're starting to put so many drivers with rides that it seems like there may be a point that there may be more rides than drivers with the adequate funding. And that's something that hasn't happened in a very long time at the Indianapolis 500. So a story dropped on Sports Car 365 this week, which a few sports car fans may have misinterpreted. It's an article that documents the ambitions of IMSA to continue down the path with the Daytona Prototype International Formula rather than going over and trying to adopt the, quite frankly, convoluted World Sports Car Formula, the hypercars, which who knows what's going to happen with that. But it seemed like in the article, IMSA CEO Scott Atherton implied that IMSA would be moving to a SPEC chassis. At the current moment, there are 4 chassis options available in Daytona Prototype International. This is the context that tipped people off. IMSA chairman Jim France is of the opinion that the deciding factor in what has made the DPi Formula so successful that a manufacturer does not have to build and design a bespoke chassis and crash test it, homologate it. That is a very expensive undertaking, said CEO Scott Atherton. Our vision for the next generation would be to incorporate a similar approach, if not an identical approach. And that may have been where a lot of fans got annoyed. Whether it's the same constructors remains to be determined, but that formula has been so effective in terms of keeping costs of entry and of competing at a relatively affordable level that has been deemed by the manufacturers and teams to be a viable, sustainable model in which we want to retain. So, Scott Atherton right there definitely used the word identical. And a lot of people, and myself included, when I first read the article, kind of looked at that and kind of interpreted that there was a possibility that IMSA may be going to a SPEC chassis. Now, what is a SPEC chassis? Well, that means that one builder, sort of like an IndyCar, would build all of the cars, at least for the DPi category, and then the manufacturers would add, similar to what's going on now, the bodywork, the engine, and the shocks to complete the prototype. Now, after reading this article about 3 or 4 times, I finally started to get the context. My pea-brain finally started working properly. And it seems what Atherton is actually saying is not that IMSA wants to go to a SPEC chassis, but more so that they want to retain the current formula the way it is going into 2022 rather than completely throw it out and try something new. They think this current format for prototype racing is working, meaning there are currently in DPi 4 chassis manufacturers. There's Multimatic, Oreca, also Ligier, and Dallara. Now, each of those manufacturers builds a chassis which each of the manufacturers currently in DPi use. Acura uses the Oreca, Dallara is the Cadillac, Multimatic is the Mazda, and Ligier is the Nissan. And it seems like the future manufacturers will have to choose to buddy up to one of the other manufacturers to build a DPi. So what this seems to be from me, or from Scott Atherton is saying, is that they want to keep this format. Now, whether or not they continue with the LMP2 based chassis formula or whether they go to something completely different where it's an IMSA spec chassis, not spec in terms of having one chassis, but IMSA determines what the rules are, the chassis builders go build them, and then the manufacturers, meaning like Ford or Cadillac, go in and complete the car with the springs and the bodywork and the engine. And certainly it's much better than again, a lot of us sky is falling types thought, worrying about spec racing. I'm sure if you guys have been on this channel any length of time, you know what my thoughts are on spec racing. But 2 points against spec racing, and then I'll get off the subject because I know people don't like me ranting about it. Number one, I don't like the fact that, especially with teams like Roger Penske in there, when you give Roger Penske, let's say everybody ran a Cadillac in IMSA, if Roger Penske had Cadillacs, almost certainly they would be pulling away from everybody else. At the start of Sebring, you saw that they did not have the range set up for their Oreca chassis very good. That allowed all the other teams with their Cadillacs or their Nissans or their Mazdas to pull away from Roger Penske. If Roger had the Cadillac, that may not have happened. Also, I feel like spec racing kind of, I guess to use a 21st century term, gatekeeps racing a little bit. The less companies that are involved mean the less people that are being hired, meaning the less options there are out there, the less creativity. And I hate the fact that a lot of the rules makers turn out to be kingmakers, whether they give a contract to Oreca, whether they give a contract to Dallara or Ilmor or whatever. There's not another company that could come in and build a better mousetrap or figure out a way to, build race cars better. And that's always been such a key fundamental aspect of racing that almost seems to be going away even at the higher levels of the sport, which I don't like. But thankfully, it seems like IMSA is not doing that. I don't think sports car fans like that. In fact, I don't think most racing fans really like that when you come down to brass tacks. I think they've heard everybody bitching about the LMP2 spec formula, or at least de facto spec at this point with all the Orecas, or all two of the Orecas. I think they've heard that, and I think they're continuing with the current format. And if you like DPi, that's great for you. If you're not too hot on DPi, they're going to keep doing it. And the final piece of news this week is that NBC Sports will add Danica Patrick to their coverage of this year's 103rd running of the Indianapolis 500. She will be a part of the pre-race show along with host of the broadcast, Mike Tirico, and will also give some analysis during the race, though what some people were fearing, she will not be in the booth. She will be mainly color commentary for the pre-race, and then some, I would guess, transitional sections throughout the broadcast. And I've actually known about this since about October, and I knew it was going to get this reaction where it's kind of split 50-50. You either love Danica or you hate Danica. And I have to say, whichever way you feel about it, I think you have to admit that this choice by NBC makes absolute and total sense, particularly when you look at their strategy for their big events and certainly their motorsports events. Look no further than their hire of Dale Earnhardt Jr. And why do I make the comparison to Dale Earnhardt Jr.? Well, he's far and away the most famous and popular driver in NASCAR in the last 15 years, and getting him on the broadcast is almost a surefire way to get eyeballs, or at least you can get him on the Today Show or the Rich Eisen Show or something, maybe get some casual sports fans to tune in. Danica, same way. most popular IndyCar driver the last 15 years, whether you like it or not, it's the truth. Most famous, most mainstream. So NBC bringing her in there makes a ton of sense from a business perspective. They can have her on the Today Show. They can have her go on Jimmy Fallon. They can have her, do all this stuff and promote the race. And then once she's actually on the broadcast, certainly, all eyes will be on Danica. Now, that being said, I think a lot of people, probably rightly so, are kind of wondering about her actual broadcasting prowess. A lot of people point to the All Drivers Xfinity broadcast a couple of years ago where I don't think I saw it, but I think some people have told me that it wasn't very good. Whatever. I think she's going to be helped significantly by having a professional like Mike Tirico, who a lot of people have wanted me to talk about. I haven't talked about yet. The hire of Mike, or not hire, but the bringing in of Mike Tirico, who obviously, quite frankly, I think did a fantastic job in his Monday Night Football gig, and now he's moved over to the Sunday Night Football gig and has done just as good of a job. I think he's a true professional. He clearly is interested in the race, and quite frankly, I think he's going to help guide Danica quite a bit. I think he's going to ask the right questions of her to get her to give very, I think, intelligent analysis. And certainly, I think Danica doing this is a good career move for her. Certainly, she's a smart businesswoman, and her doing something like this, remaining in the public eye, especially at the Indianapolis 500, something that she's been so famous for, it makes total sense. I mean, this whole thing makes total sense. Whether you like it or not, I think NBC wants to bring the big guns out for this event. They want to make their Indy 500 as big as it possibly could be, and this is the way to do it from their perspective, at least according to their strategy. And again, love Danica, hate Danica, it really doesn't matter. And again, it's not like she's going to be taking over for Townsend Bell or Paul Tracy. She's going to be used in the pre-race, probably just giving very general thoughts, not going to be doing a whole lot of analysis. So, no harm, no foul. I think it's only a positive from this perspective. That being said, they could Rutledge her and make it really annoying for Danica to be on the broadcast, but you never know. I do think NBC listens, so, if they do go a little too far, I'm sure they'll hear the social media reaction. So that has been This Week in Racing. I hope you enjoyed it. Got some good content coming up later this week. In fact, probably later tomorrow, specifically talking about IndyCar at Circuit of the Americas. And next weekend, I'll be actually racing myself at the Newcastle Motorsports Park. So if you have a spare weekend and want to see me actually drive, probably fail, spin out, crash, catch on fire, flip over, something like that, maybe you'll want to come out and check that out. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport content, and I'll see you in the next video.